critical point in our development as a society. Until now, we as mankind have been focused, and we have been simply focused on advancement, continuously building and innovating, breaking down barriers, trying to understand nature just so that we can get around it and make it work for us. Trying to make it work for us. This kind of advancement is what has propelled us to do so many great things. However, today we face a very different kind of challenge. This challenge is completely different from what we faced in the past, and honestly, is significantly more severe. For the first time in our history, we are being forced to deal with the repercussions of our unbridled growth. Problems such as environmental issues, which we don't know will ever be resolved, sustainable energy problems, social conflicts driven by years of overlooked division, and modern warfare are just a few of the problems that can be attributed to our unrestricted aptitude to grow. So what does this mean? What does this mean for humanity? Well, in the past, whenever we've faced unprecedented problems, we as humanity have always looked to one thing and one thing only, and that thing is ourselves. We've always turned to a few key individuals who are able to take mankind, lift us on their shoulders, and move us from the darkness into the light. However, given the unusual nature of our problems, these highly innovative problem solvers are no less than an absolute necessity. In the past, if we had not had these highly innovative problem solvers, society's growth would have simply stagnated. We simply wouldn't have gone anywhere. However, in today's world, if we do not have these highly innovative problem solvers, we will, for the first time, be required to step back in our development, and this could have catastrophic consequences. So, unfortunately, even though that this is the first time in history where we have a serious need for these highly innovative problem solvers, this is also the first time that we're facing a global lack of talent. We're simply not producing the highly innovative problem solvers that we have always had in the past. So why is that? Why is it that now of all times, the time where we need them the most, we're not meeting our demands? Well, let's look to the last couple of hundred years. The last couple of hundred years have been no less than a golden era for human advancement. In this time, we've accomplished so much because we have had a huge number of these highly innovative problem solvers. So comparing the humans of now to the humans of back then, we should be able to see some noticeable differences. Given the fact that the last few hundred years is a relatively small amount of time on the evolutionary timeline, it is conceivable that the humans of today are not too different from the humans of the past, at least in a physiological sense. If we are not physically different, then there has to be something in the way we're raised, how our children grow up. But here we run into another problem. Every kid comes from a different household with different traditions, different customs, and different things that they value. Because every kid has such different perspectives, it's hard to analyze the problem. If we want to analyze this problem on a large scale, be it global or national, we have to find a common denominator, something that's similar among all kids and their development that we can point to and say could be a probable cause for why we don't have highly innovative problem solvers. What we'll find is that there is one such factor. Luckily, in the West, most kids until the age of 18 spend over 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, in one highly controlled environment. This environment is none other than schools. If we want to find what it is that's preventing humanity from having these highly innovative problem solvers, we must examine the modern education system. So, what is the modern education system like today? Well, whenever I think of the education system, I don't think about the highly rigorous AP classes that I'm taking now, or the stimulating speech and debate and fine arts classes of junior high, but I think all the way back to pre-K and kindergarten. During this time, at such an early phase, there were a few key events helped define what the modern education system is all about. For example, one such instance is when we had just figured out how to read. We had been reading small words. Our teacher came in one day and began to introduce to us the counting system. She held up one object, said the word one, we repeated back. Held up two objects, said two, we repeated back. And we continued this exercise for a period of many months. Before long, we knew how to count. Upon completing this strenuous, rigorous exercise, I remember thinking to myself, why is it that I need to know how to quantify the amount of something? Why is that a necessary skill? Why did I just go through this entire exercise? This huge cloud of doubt that I had in my tiny 4-year-old mind was immediately sequestered by the fact that I felt an obligation towards my teacher. Because my teacher was telling me to do this, for some inexplainable reason, I just had to do it. Another example, and perhaps a more relatable one, is that of coloring. Coloring is an exercise that we're all familiar with. We start to do it in pre-K, but it really lasts all throughout elementary school. Never do I remember being given a blank sheet of paper and being told to draw as I saw fit. Instead, we were given pre-made drawings in which we were told to color inside the lines. The second somebody dared to color outside the lines, or, God forbid, put their own additions to the drawing, they were no less than shunned by their teachers and their peers, as coloring outside the lines is indicative of a lack of fine motor skills, something that the modern education system highly values in today's youth. While these examples seem rather trivial and highly inapplicable, they actually reveal the core tenet of the modern education system, and that is having standardized content and curriculum. As it can be seen from the very beginning, from pre-K, we are simply handed a set of things to learn, and we're given a roadmap on how exactly we're supposed to learn these things. We're never supposed to ask questions, we're never supposed to raise concerns. We're just supposed to take what is given and just supposed to go with it as far as we can. This standardized content and curriculum is continuously reinforced with things like home assignments, which ensure that the teacher can continue teaching things every successive day, and periodic assessments, which ensure that the kids stay motivated in studying through the use of grades. Now, this system is not only highly structured and methodical, it is also made to where it is highly effective. Not only can it send a huge amount of content towards the students, but it also has safeguards built in to make sure that the students not only hear the knowledge, but absorb it, and over time, accumulate their wealth of knowledge. However, looking at this system, it's hard to tell why we are suffering from a lack of highly innovative problem solvers. It seems that this system is virtually perfect. We should be gaining the amount of knowledge, we should be gaining a sizable amount of knowledge to where we're able to solve many of our world's problems. However, if we change our perspective, if we take a look at it from the student's point of view, we'll find something completely different. The approach that I just used to analyze the education system and come up with the conclusion that it is structured and methodical and highly effective is something that education reformers have used for decades. What they essentially do is they look at the modern education system from far back, and they expect that every time they make a change, the students will react exactly the way that they predict. For example, if scores in a certain science class are low, they'll simply add more standardized tests, or they'll add more required lab hours or something like that. And they expect that the students will respond appropriately by getting higher scores. However, by taking a student's perspective, what we'll find is that this is actually not the case. A student's perspective reveals that the overarching issue in the modern education system is a lack of interest. Students simply aren't interested in the knowledge that is being given to them and the way that they're told to acquire that knowledge. And as we all know, if we're not interested in doing something, if we don't want to do it, it's really hard to do it, and especially to do it well. This lack of interest problem is highly complex, but it primarily presents itself in two different ways. The first way is something I like to call the 90% problem. The 90% problem is called as it is because it primarily deals with the bottom 90% of students in any given locale. The 90% problem begins with the central tenet of the modern education system, which is enormous obligation. Like I said at the beginning, we are simply handed a set of things to learn, and we're given a roadmap that tells us exactly how we're supposed to learn it. Now, the bottom 90% of students look at what the modern education system is giving them and see it as a burden. They see it as a burden that they'll have to shoulder for so many years. And if they have to, obviously because they see it as a burden, they find the obligatory nature of the education system highly undesirable and repulsive. This negative attitude that they have can be explained with multiple complex psychological reasons, but the most simple one is that people simply aren't interested in doing things that they're being forced to do. They want it to come about naturally. This negative attitude that students have towards the education system later manifests itself towards different attitudes with teachers. It leads these individuals to see teachers and administrators, honorable individuals who spend their lives trying to nurture our youths, as pestering and mean, as it is these teachers that are pushing the modern education system onto these students in the first place. Because the students now have a way to take all their negative attitude and focus it on a certain tangible group of people that they see every single day, this attitude changes into something else. This negative attitude morphs into distrust, and this leads to agitation and a desire to be resistant to what teachers and administrators are telling them. They don't want to give teachers the satisfaction of completing their jobs because they're pushing something that they don't want in the first place. This agitation and resistance leads teachers and administrators to do the only thing they can, which is to strengthen their control over the school in the spirit of maintaining order. All this does is it leads to even more distrust, more agitation, and more resistance, and this vicious cycle continues until eventually this resistance becomes so high that students turn to highly inappropriate behaviors, such as involvement in drugs and violence. This is a phenomenon that we've seen all too well here in the United States in the past decade. And for the students that are able to make it to the workforce, make it out of the education system, they typically end up in low-level jobs in which they have little to no opportunity for advancement. This stagnant nature of living, not really going anywhere, simply living to survive, can lead to chronic mental and emotional problems, as well as a continuous dissatisfaction with life. Not to mention the fact that these former students will never be able to become the highly innovative problem solvers that our society so desperately needs. Now, I know what you may be thinking, that obviously there are some students for whom the modern education system does not work. But what about the students that perform exceptionally well? Isn't the modern education system doing everything right by them? Aren't they doing exceptionally well because of this education system? Behold the 10% problem. The presentation of the lack of interest problem in the top 10% of students in any given locale is not only more complex and hard to see, but it is also far more important in terms of the development of highly innovative problem solvers. The 10% problem, like the 90% problem, begins with the central tenet of the modern education system, which is enormous obligation in the acquisition of knowledge. This, unlike the bottom 90% of students, these students, because they have an inner drive, an inner ambition, they don't see the obligation as a negative thing. Because they have a desire to be the best at whatever they do, they take this obligation and they want to just run with it. They want to get the best results they possibly can, simply out of spirit of their character. So that's exactly what they do, and they end up getting amazing results. These highly driven and motivated students are the ones who get the perfect test scores, the high GPAs, the perfect class ranks, and basically become the students that the modern education system intended them to become. So looking at this, it seems like we've solved our problem. Shouldn't these be the people who should be solving our world's problems? However, what we're not taking into consideration is the path. To complete any difficult task, there's a certain amount of sacrifice that is required to get from this point to this point. Unfortunately, the sacrifice that many students unknowingly make is a really important one. What ends up happening is that students, in the quest for academics, through the pressures of the modern education system, typically lose their interests, a huge part of their character. Somebody's interests, whether it be scientific research or the arts or humanities, is a huge constituent of who they are as a person. By being so absolved in academics at such a critical phase in their development, they eventually lose sight of these interests and eventually lose sight of their character. This phenomena is best represented through the college admissions process. The college admissions process is one of the most controversial and highly debated topics of the last few years, mainly because nobody truly understands what it takes to get into the top colleges. Obviously, the top 10% kids who want the best grades obviously want to get into the best colleges because they understand the value of higher education. However, when you combine this desire that is born purely out of ambition with the pressures of the modern education system, you get less of a desire but more of a panic, a fear. Kids aren't excited about going to college, they're not excited to learn new things, but instead they're fearful of what college they'll end up at, or the possibility that they may not get into the college of their choice. This panic surrounding admissions trickles down to grades, and these are the same students who, when they get a B in a class or even a B on a test, feel like the sky is falling because in their minds they are not the perfect students that the college of their dreams is looking for. This panic surrounding the admissions process and grades typically lies dormant until students reach high school. When students reach high school, they realize what it actually takes to get into these top colleges. You can't only be good at academics, but you also have to show who you are outside of school through the use of extracurricular activities. However, for many students, when they enter high school, and they start to look for real extracurricular activities, things that work really well, things that would look really good on a resume, they're almost completely lost. Because of the fact that for the last however many years, the modern education system has hammered out all of the interests they had, they simply aren't able to find the extracurriculars where they fit in. If they're not able to find where they fit in, then they're never able to perform to their potential. But there's still a panic. Even though they can't find what they should do, there's still a panic. This panic manifests itself in something I call the magnitude approach. What kids will essentially do is they'll go out and join as many clubs, community service organizations, honor societies as they can, so that when it comes to the college application season, they can simply write that they were able to do this huge number of hours for this huge number of people for this huge amount of time, and therefore are good candidates. While they're sitting there with their fingers crossed, waiting for their acceptance letter, most of these students have to deal with rejection from these top schools. So why is it that students who put so much work into academics, so much work into extracurriculars, are not able to get into the schools of their choice? It's not that they aren't putting effort, but it's that they're putting effort in the wrong areas. If we look at the students that actually do go to the Harvards and the Stanfords of the world, we'll find that they're not necessarily the students with the best grades. They're simply students who follow their passion. They're simply students who do what they want to do, and that is why they're able to achieve so much. Because they're doing what they want, whatever they're doing seems like fun. And when something seems like fun, you don't realize how much effort you're actually putting in, and therefore you're able to reap a lot more benefits. So the lack of interest problem in the top 10% of students most obviously affects higher education. Because these students aren't able to get into the top colleges of their choices, a lot of their opportunities are limited from a higher education point of view. However, perhaps more critically, is that when it comes to the time to decide on my profession, my career choice, what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, because of the fact that they still haven't really found their interests again, because they were all lost through the modern education system, these students never really find where they fit in. They go through careers, they try to do the best they can, but because they don't have sight of their interests, they're not able to find where they can maximize their potential. And if they can't maximize their potential, then they most certainly cannot become the highly innovative problem solvers that the world is looking for. So what is it that students of today need? Well, the biggest problem that the education system faces, like I said, is lack of interest. So students need help in, first of all, finding their passion, and after they find their passion, how to best capitalize on it so that they can achieve the most benefit. Now, to do this, there are a few very common sense reforms that can be made to the education system. First of all, we need to provide opportunities for students to find their passion. From a very early age, we should be focused on presenting students with as many options as possible with regards to applied education fields, things such as musical performance or scientific research. The more we expose children in their youth, the higher chance we have that they'll find their passion early on. Once a student has found his or her passion, we should tailor the formal education track to align with that chosen interest so that it can be nurtured and grown to the point where they really can maximize their potential. While these solutions look good on paper, they look easy to follow, they're completely contrary to what the modern education system is built on. So to implement reforms such as this would take a really long time that we may or may not have. So in the meantime, I'll leave you with this. If there's anything I've realized in the last few years, it's that in 20 years, my SAT score won't matter, my GPA won't matter, my class rank won't matter, and whether or not I got an A in English 3 definitely will not matter. However, what will matter is whether or not I've found my passion and to what extent I've carried it. So I encourage all of you, especially my peers, to find your passion and chase it to the end of the earth. And let's all do this so that we can become the people that our world so desperately needs.